"Hey security guy, maybe you can polish the table before the grown-ups talk big money." The laughter that followed was sharp, quick, and ugly, echoing off the glass walls of the 60-story boardroom like it had a life of its own. The man they were mocking, standing quietly at the head of the room with a tray of water glasses, didn't flinch. He simply set the tray down, his posture calm, his eyes steady. To them, he was just another employee in a dark security uniform, someone invisible, someone they could talk down to without consequence. They had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, the balance of power in this entire company would flip on its head. From the windows, the skyline of New York City stretched endlessly, glittering with the late morning sun. Inside, Horizon Capital's senior executives were gathered around a polished mahogany table, discussing a $500 acquisition like it was a done deal. Laptops open, coffee steaming, voices dripping with self-importance. The man in uniform, tall, broad-shouldered, with skin the color of deep mahogany and a face that seemed carved from stone, took a slow breath. His name wasn't on the meeting agenda. In fact, it hadn't been spoken in this building for years. He'd built this empire from scratch. He'd poured his vision, his sweat, and more than a decade of his life into it. Then he'd stepped away, by choice, trusting others to protect the culture he'd created. What he found when he returned was something far different: arrogance, corruption, and an undercurrent of discrimination so thick it practically hummed in the air. And now, here he was, standing in the middle of the very people who had run his company into the ground, people who thought they were untouchable. He let the silence stretch just a little longer, savoring the moment. Then, with a voice calm enough to cut through steel, he said, "Actually, I do have an opinion on your little $500 million deal. But first, you might want to correct the 3 fatal errors in your projections. Unless, of course, you're planning to collapse in court before the ink is dry." The room went still. No laughter now. Just the sound of hearts skipping a beat. 2 weeks earlier, Marcus Bennett stepped off a late-night train at Penn Station with nothing but a leather duffel bag and a plan that most men in his position would have called insane. On paper, Marcus had everything a man could want. At 45, he was a self-made billionaire, founder of Horizon Capital, and once celebrated as one of the most visionary black CEOs in America. The media had dubbed him the architect, a nod to the way he built companies like other men built skyscrapers. Solid, innovative, impossible to ignore. But for the past 5 years, Marcus had been away. After stepping down from the day-to-day grind, he'd moved to Miami, invested quietly, and let the new leadership run with the ball, as he told the press. He believed in giving people the freedom to prove themselves. That faith had just been shattered. The call came from an old friend still working in the company, one of the few Marcus trusted without question. She didn't start with hello. Instead, her first words were, "Marcus, the place you built is unrecognizable. They're cutting diversity programs. They're freezing promotions for minority employees. And you wouldn't believe the things they're saying when they think no one's listening." She told him about meetings where executives openly mocked staff, hiring decisions made over golf with old college buddies, and a toxic undercurrent that bled into every department. Even more alarming, Horizon was in the middle of negotiating its biggest acquisition yet, a $500 million deal that could either launch the company into the stratosphere or sink it for good. Marcus could have confronted them directly as himself, but that would have tipped them off. No, he needed to see the rot up close, unfiltered. He needed to know who was truly loyal, who was complicit, and who was pulling the strings. So, he called in a favor from a friend who owned a private security firm. Within days, he had a full uniform, clearance credentials, and a new identity. Marcus King, night shift security guard. It was the perfect disguise. Invisible. Forgettable. The kind of person no one notices unless they need a door unlocked or a spill cleaned up. But Marcus wasn't there to guard doors. He was there to gather ammunition, the kind that could take down an empire. And as he boarded the elevator to Horizon's executive floor for the first time in years, the weight of what he was about to do settled in his chest. This wasn't just business anymore. This was war. Marcus had been inside Horizon Capital for less than 24 hours when the mask started to slip. Not his mask, theirs. The first shift went quietly enough. A few polite nods from night staff, the low hum of cleaning machines, the faint smell of lemon polish in the air. But when morning came and the executives started filing in, the atmosphere changed. They moved through the lobby like they owned the air itself. Sharp suits, louder voices, the kind of confidence that feeds on power. Marcus positioned himself near the security desk, watching without watching, letting them think he was just another fixture. That's when he saw it. The first crack. A young Latina receptionist dropped a stack of presentation binders in front of the elevators. Before she could bend to pick them up, a tall executive in a navy suit stepped around her, muttering, "Guess they'll hire anybody these days." His tone wasn't just dismissive, it was laced with that cutting edge Marcus knew too well. Minutes later, in the cafe line, two senior managers laughed over coffee about trimming the dead weight after the Westbridge acquisition. One of them made a slicing gesture across his neck, then leaned in and whispered something about quotas that made the other snort into his latte. By midday, Marcus understood the problem wasn't just one or two bad actors. It was systemic. Small humiliations piled up like bricks in a wall. Comments about accents, jokes about hair, offhand remarks about culture fit that always seemed to exclude the same people. What hit hardest wasn't the cruelty, it was the silence. People heard. People saw. But no one stepped in. Some looked away. Others forced an awkward smile and kept moving. The quiet told Marcus everything. This wasn't new. This was normal here now. The moment that sealed it came just before lunch. Marcus was making his rounds near the executive boardroom when the CFO, Daniel Rhodes, waved him over. "Hey, Chief," he said, smirking. "Got a spill in here. Think you can handle it before the big brains start solving the world's problems?" Inside, there was no spill. Just a group of executives flipping through reports. Daniel handed him a trash bin and, without missing a beat in his conversation, said, "And maybe you can give us your expert take on the acquisition. You know, from the janitor's perspective." Laughter rolled around the table. Marcus forced a tight smile, took the bin, and left. But inside, the decision was made. This wasn't just about observing anymore. It was about dismantling this rot from the top down. And he now knew exactly where to start. By the second morning, Marcus had mapped the terrain. He knew who strutted, who whispered, and who avoided eye contact when the temperature in the room got cold. Now, it was time to test the waters, find someone on the inside who still remembered what decency looked like. That someone revealed herself over a chance encounter in the elevator. Her name was Natalie Price, Director of Compliance. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, no wasted words. She stepped into the elevator with a tablet tucked under her arm, clearly preoccupied. Marcus kept his head slightly bowed, playing the part, until she glanced at the maintenance badge on his chest. "You're new," she said, almost absent-mindedly. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, keeping his voice even. Then something shifted. The elevator stopped 2 floors early. The doors opened, and the CFO, Daniel Rhodes, stepped in with 2 other executives. The temperature dropped instantly. One of them made a show of glancing at Marcus's uniform, then muttered something about the help riding with management. Natalie's eyes flicked toward Marcus, just for a second, but what Marcus saw there wasn't pity, it was calculation. When the doors opened again, she stepped out, then paused. "You missed a trash can outside the legal department," she said loudly enough for the others to hear. But once they were out of sight, she turned back and murmured, "Conference room C, 3 p.m. bring nothing. See nothing." Marcus didn't smile, didn't nod. He just kept walking. That afternoon, conference room C was dim, blinds drawn. Natalie was already there, tablet open, a manila folder resting beside her coffee. "I don't know who you are," she began, "but I've seen the way you watch people. And I've been documenting things here for months, things nobody wants to put in writing." She pushed the folder toward him. Inside were printed emails, performance review notes, and photographs of handwritten memos, each one a small piece of a larger pattern. Discrimination. Retaliation. Promotions blocked without cause. "I thought about going to the board," she continued, "but Daniel's got them under his thumb. They've turned HR into his cleanup crew. If you want to do something about this place, you'll need more than proof, you'll need timing." Marcus met her gaze, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Then let's start the clock," he said. For the first time since stepping into Horizon Capital, he wasn't alone. He had an ally. And together, they were about to pull on the first loose thread in a very expensive suit. The first time Marcus came face-to-face with William Harkins, the CEO of Horizon Capital, it wasn't in a polished boardroom or at a charity gala. It was in the marble-floored executive lobby, just after sunrise, when the building was still shaking off the quiet of night. Marcus was pushing his maintenance cart toward the glass doors when William stepped out of the elevator, flanked by 2 senior VPs. Tall, silver-haired, and wearing a suit that probably cost more than a year of Marcus's old rent, William had the kind of presence that made people step aside without thinking. The VPs saw Marcus first. One of them smirked, muttering something under his breath. William didn't break stride, but his voice carried. You'd think they'd keep the staff in the back halls where they belong. Marcus stopped, his hand tightening on the cart handle. He kept his head slightly lowered, playing the part, but the words burned. The VPs chuckled, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged space. As they passed, one of them deliberately dropped an empty coffee cup onto the polished floor. William glanced down at it, then up at Marcus. There you go, son. Earn that paycheck. The air in the lobby seemed to shrink. A security guard at the far end looked away, pretending to check his phone. Marcus bent down, picked up the cup slowly, and placed it in the trash bag on his cart. Anything else, sir? He asked evenly. The use of sir wasn't deference, it was a test. William didn't notice. He was already walking toward the front doors, dismissing Marcus from his mind as quickly as he'd acknowledged him. But Marcus noticed something. In William's arrogance, there was carelessness. A man who believed he couldn't be challenged would eventually leave a door wide open. From the mezzanine above, Natalie watched the entire exchange through the glass railing. When William and his entourage stepped outside, she caught Marcus's eye and gave the smallest of nods. The first move had been made. Marcus didn't smile, but inside, he knew, this wasn't just a passing insult. It was the crack in William Harkins's armor. And soon, Marcus planned to drive a wedge straight through it. The discovery didn't happen in some dramatic late-night break-in. It came quietly, almost too easily, during one of Marcus's early morning rounds on the executive floor. Most of the offices were dark, their glass walls reflecting the city's first rays of sunlight. But William Harkins's corner office was different. It was lit, humming faintly, like a place that never truly slept. Marcus rolled his maintenance cart down the hallway, eyes scanning every reflection. Through the partially open door, he saw the faint glow of a monitor. He stepped inside, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who belonged there, at least in appearance. On William's desk, a thick binder sat open, pages of spreadsheets covered in sharp, red annotations. Marcus glanced at the screen. It displayed a set of financial projections for Horizon Capital's upcoming merger with Redwood Tech. On the surface, the numbers looked promising. But Marcus had spent years building companies, studying markets, and understanding how financial statements could be twisted. What caught his attention was a single line item buried in the cost breakdown: consulting services, $8.4 million. The listed vendor was a shell company Marcus recognized from his earlier life, a name often used to siphon funds in fraudulent deals. He scanned more pages. There were inflated asset valuations, grossly underestimated debt obligations, and strategic partnership bonuses paid out to executives who hadn't contributed a single measurable result. Marcus's chest tightened. This wasn't just creative accounting, it was a deliberate scheme. If these documents were accurate, William was orchestrating a merger built on doctored numbers, one that would devastate Redwood Tech's employees and stockholders while lining the pockets of a handful of Horizon's top brass. He pulled out his phone and quietly snapped a series of photos. Every click felt like a gunshot in the silent office. He made sure to capture not just the numbers, but the signatures, Williams, the CFO's, and a legal compliance officer who was likely either complicit or coerced. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Marcus slid the binder back exactly where he'd found it and adjusted his cart. A junior analyst walked by, barely glancing at him. To her, he was just the janitor emptying trash. Back in the service corridor, Marcus reviewed the images, his mind already racing. He needed more than just numbers. He needed context, witness statements, proof of intent. This was bigger than personal revenge. It was about exposing the rot at the core of Horizon Capital. That night, he met Natalie at a quiet cafe 3 blocks from the office. Sliding his phone across the table, he let her scroll through the photos. She froze halfway through the binder images. "Marcus, this isn't just corporate greed," she whispered. "This is criminal." Marcus leaned in, voice low but steady. "Then we make sure the right people see it. And we don't stop until William Harkins has nowhere left to hide." The boardroom on the 60th floor was built for intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, a 20-foot mahogany table polished to a mirror finish, and leather chairs so wide they felt like thrones. That morning, every seat was filled. Horizon Capital's top brass had gathered for the final approval of the Redwood Tech acquisition. The atmosphere buzzed with self-congratulation, as if the deal was already in the bag. Marcus stood outside the double glass doors in his security uniform, one hand resting on the handle of a rolling cart stacked with bottled water. From inside, muffled laughter spilled out, followed by William Harkins's booming voice. And once this deal closes, gentlemen, and ladies of course, we'll all be celebrating at my place in the Hamptons. Drinks on me. Laughter. The kind that came from people who believed they'd already won. Marcus pushed open the doors. Conversations faltered for a moment, then resumed, as if his presence was beneath notice. William glanced up and smirked. Well, look who it is, our in-house security expert. Come to give us your thoughts on a $500 million acquisition. The room chuckled. A couple of board members exchanged knowing grins. Marcus set the cart against the wall, then stepped forward, pulling a slim leather folder from under his arm. Yes, he said calmly. I do have thoughts. But before you sign that contract, I'd like to point out the 3 fatal errors in your projections. Errors that will collapse this deal in court before it even closes. The laughter stopped. William's smirk tightened. Excuse me. Marcus laid out 3 pages on the table. First, asset valuations for Redwood Tech are inflated by 26%. Second, $8.4 million in consulting fees are being funneled through a shell company in Delaware, one linked to your personal holding accounts. Third, undisclosed debt obligations that will trigger the moment this acquisition is finalized. You sign today, and within a year Horizon Capital is insolvent. Gasps rippled through the room. One board member, an older man with silver hair, leaned forward, scanning the pages. These look legitimate. They are, Marcus said. I took the liberty of verifying them with independent auditors. Oh, and I've also recorded conversations, captured emails, and spoken to employees about the toxic culture festering under your leadership. William's face went pale. Who the hell do you think you are? Marcus straightened, his voice firm but unhurried. Marcus Bennett. Founder. Majority shareholder. And starting today, the man taking his company back. The room froze. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning over the stunned silence. William pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly. You can't just walk in here. I can, Marcus interrupted. And I have. You're done, William. Effective, immediately. Natalie Price stepped into the room from the doorway, carrying a laptop. I've sent the evidence to the board, the SEC, and the Department of Justice, she said. You might want to call your lawyer. Security appeared, real security this time, and positioned themselves behind William. The board members exchanged glances, the balance of power shifting in real time. William looked around the table, searching for an ally, but found only a wall of blank faces. Slowly, he sank back into his chair, his empire crumbling in the space of a few minutes. Marcus gathered the documents and stepped back from the table. Gentlemen, ladies, this meeting is adjourned. The moment the boardroom doors closed behind William, the tension inside the room shifted from shock to something sharper, relief mixed with unease. The executives who had been laughing minutes earlier now stared at Marcus like they were seeing him for the first time. He didn't waste a second. Effective immediately, Marcus said, his voice steady but edged with authority. William Harkins is terminated from all positions within Horizon Capital. His corporate access is revoked, his severance nullified, and his pending stock options frozen pending investigation. No one argued. Not a single voice rose in defense of William. That silence spoke louder than any accusation. Everyone had known something was wrong. They'd just been too afraid to say it. Marcus turned to the head of corporate security. Escort him from the building. Retrieve his company devices and secure his office. Now. Within minutes, William was back in the hallway, flanked by 2 guards. His once perfect tie hung crooked, his jaw tight with rage. He stopped just long enough to glare at Marcus. You think this is over? William hissed. You've made an enemy you can't afford. Marcus stepped closer, his voice low enough that only William could hear. I don't think, William. I know. And the difference between us is that my enemies are built on greed and fear. Mine are built on truth. You decide which lasts longer. William's eyes flickered, not with remorse, but with the realization that this wasn't just a defeat. This was a public execution of his power. The guards led him toward the elevator, the click of their polished shoes fading into the distance. Marcus turned back to the board. "We're done tolerating the behavior that's rotted this company from the inside out. Anyone who contributed to it, covered for it, or profited from it will be held accountable. That includes every single person in this room." A murmur rippled across the table. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. Others looked almost hopeful. Natalie stepped forward with a stack of printed directives. "Effective today, we're initiating a full internal audit, financial, cultural, and operational. Every department will be reviewed. Every promotion and termination decision in the last 5 years will be examined." Marcus nodded. "And make no mistake, this isn't just about cleaning up after William. This is about making sure no one like him can ever rise here again." It was a declaration, but it was also a promise. Horizon Capital wasn't just getting a new chapter, it was getting a reckoning. And Marcus Bennett was making sure the pen was in the right hands this time. By the next morning, Marcus Bennett's return to Horizon Capital wasn't just a boardroom event, it was headline news. The story broke online at 6:42 a.m. when a business reporter from the New York Ledger published an article titled, "Undercover CEO Ousts Horizon Capital Chief in Shocking Boardroom Showdown." Within minutes, the piece went viral. Social media lit up with hashtags like #UndercoverCEO, #Horizon Shakeup, and #Justice Served. Cable news picked it up before noon. Anchors replayed shaky cell phone footage, recorded by a junior analyst, showing Marcus in his security uniform, standing calm and unshaken as he dismantled Williams' financial projections. The clip ended with his now famous line, "I'm Marcus Bennett, founder, majority shareholder, and starting today, the man taking his company back." Commentators couldn't get enough of it. Some called him a genius for exposing the rot from the inside. Others debated whether the tactic was too extreme, even for a CEO reclaiming his company. Either way, the public had already made up its mind. Marcus was the hero of the week. The stock market, however, wasn't as sentimental. Horizon shares dropped nearly 12% in the first few hours of trading. Investors feared instability, whispering about the risks of leadership shakeups during a major merger. Competitors circled like sharks, hoping to exploit the uncertainty. Marcus wasn't surprised. In fact, he'd predicted the drop. He knew this wasn't just about fixing numbers, it was about restoring trust, and that would take more than a few press conferences. Natalie briefed him on the media frenzy in his office. "We have 3 interview requests from national outlets, 2 from international. Everyone wants to know the same thing, why you did it this way." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Good. Then we tell them the truth. Not the cleaned-up corporate version. The real story. Every detail." She hesitated. "You know that's going to make enemies outside this building too." Marcus's expression didn't waver. "Then they'll know exactly where to find me." That afternoon, Marcus stood in front of a wall of cameras, his image beamed to millions. Calm, direct, and without a script, he laid out the corruption, the culture, and the plan to rebuild. The storm was here. Marcus had no intention of waiting it out. He planned to stand in the center and use it to burn away everything that didn't belong. The Monday after the media storm, Marcus walked through the glass doors of Horizon Capital, not as a shadow in a security uniform, but as the man in charge. This time, the lobby was silent. No smug glances, no muttered jokes. People looked up from their desks, some with cautious curiosity, others with something Marcus hadn't seen here in years, hope. He didn't waste the moment. At 9 a.m., every department head was seated in the auditorium, joined by staff from every floor. Natalie stood off to the side, a stack of new policy binders at the ready. Marcus took the stage, no teleprompter, no rehearsed script. "We're not here today to talk about profits or mergers," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "We're here to talk about how this place became something it was never meant to be, and how we're going to fix it." He laid it out in plain terms. Effective immediately, Horizon Capital would adopt a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, retaliation, and harassment. Promotions and raises would be reviewed by an independent panel, with names and demographics hidden to eliminate bias. Every leadership position would require quarterly training in ethics and diversity. Mandatory, no exceptions. Then came the structural changes. Marcus announced the creation of the Office of Corporate Integrity, headed by none other than Natalie Price. Her mandate: protect whistleblowers, investigate complaints, and publish public quarterly reports. It wasn't just about rules, It was about transparency. Salaries across the company would be benchmarked and posted internally. Hiring panels would include employees from different departments, not just management. The company's community outreach budget would be doubled, with a focus on scholarships and programs for underrepresented students in finance and technology. Some in the crowd looked stunned. Others started clapping before he'd even finished. Marcus didn't sugarcoat the road ahead. "This is going to be hard," he said. "Some of you may feel uncomfortable. Good. Change should make us uncomfortable. Because comfort is what let the wrong people run this company for far too long." By the end of the meeting, people were standing, clapping not just for Marcus but for the idea that Horizon could be a place worth believing in again. As he stepped off the stage, Marcus caught sight of a young receptionist, the same woman he'd seen mocked in the lobby weeks earlier. She was smiling now, clapping with both hands. And in that moment, Marcus knew the culture was already starting to shift. The rebuild had begun. And this time, it was built to last. For 3 weeks, Horizon Capital had been a hive of change. New policies were in motion, the toxic energy was thinning, and Marcus could feel the culture starting to turn. But if he'd learned anything from decades in business, it was this. People like William Harkins didn't just disappear. The first sign came on a Monday morning when Natalie burst into his office with her tablet. "We've got a problem," she said. "William's been talking to the press." On her screen was an article from the Financial Herald. The headline read, "Ex-Horizon CEO alleges hostile takeover, questions legitimacy of new leadership." The piece painted Marcus as a power-hungry founder staging a coup to seize control of a profitable company. William claimed the financial evidence Marcus presented had been taken out of context, and hinted that Marcus himself had mismanaged funds during his original tenure. Within hours, the story was being picked up by business blogs and social media accounts that thrived on corporate drama. Hashtags began trending, #Horizon Scandal, #CO Feud, and investors started calling, demanding explanations. Marcus sat back in his chair, expression unreadable. He's trying to muddy the water. If the public can't tell who's telling the truth, he thinks he can survive. Natalie nodded grimly. He's also feeding selective leaks to some of your competitors. It's calculated. Marcus leaned forward. Then we hit back the right way. Not with spin. With transparency. By noon, Horizon Capital had released a 42-page report detailing the internal investigation, complete with documents, timestamps, and corroborating witness statements. They didn't just counter Williams' claims, they dismantled them piece by piece. Marcus then held a live-streamed press conference, answering every question directly, refusing to hide behind lawyers or PR buffers. "This company belongs to its people and its shareholders," he said. "Not to those who would exploit it for personal gain. The truth doesn't need to hide. It stands on its own." The strategy worked. By the end of the week, investor confidence began to recover, and Williams' narrative lost momentum. But Marcus knew this wasn't the end of Williams' games. It was simply the first battle in a longer war, and he was ready for whatever came next. 6 months after the day Marcus walked back into Horizon Capital disguised as a security guard, the company looked, and felt, like an entirely different place. The toxic culture that once hung in the air like smog had cleared. Employees who once kept their heads down were speaking up in meetings. Team leaders were collaborating across departments instead of guarding their territory. And for the first time in years, turnover rates had dropped sharply. Financially, Horizon was not just stable, it was growing. The merger with Redwood Tech had been renegotiated under fair terms, preserving jobs and creating new opportunities. Investors who had once been wary were now praising Marcus's leadership in shareholder meetings. William Harkins, meanwhile, had faded from the headlines. Legal proceedings were still ongoing, but without control of the narrative and with the truth made public, his influence had all but vanished. Marcus didn't celebrate Williams' downfall. He didn't need to. The victory was in what Horizon had become. One crisp Friday morning, Marcus stood in the same boardroom where the showdown had happened. But this time, the room was filled not with arrogance, but with gratitude. Natalie stood beside him, presenting the quarterly transparency report. When she finished, the entire room broke into applause. Marcus stepped forward. "I didn't come back here for revenge," he said. "I came back because I believe in what this company can be when it's built on trust, respect, and integrity. Power built on fear is fragile. It collapses the moment it's challenged. But power built on truth? That lasts." He paused, scanning the room, making eye contact with department heads, junior analysts, and interns alike. The lesson here isn't just about business, he continued. It's about life. When you see something wrong, whether it's in your company, your community, or your own circle, you have a choice. You can stay silent and let it grow, or you can speak up and change it. It will cost you. It will be uncomfortable. But the price of doing nothing is always higher. The room was quiet, the weight of his words settling over every person there. Then the applause started again, stronger, louder, genuine. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus stepped to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. He knew there would be more challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a deep, steady certainty. Horizon Capital wasn't just saved, it was worth saving. And that, he thought, was a legacy worth leaving behind.